Welcome back, Mira Funk.
Thank you.
We were talking before we did a long marathon conversation about non-duality, psychedelics, identity, like all the things. And in that conversation, we promised that you would take me through some of the preparation, integration work and meditations that you do that prepare people for some of the work that you do with psychedelic medicines. So can you talk more about that and introduce us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as I said in the previous segment, I usually focus mostly on the front end of the integration. And the way that I do that is by, first of all, just connecting with people, human to human, as we've been doing, and putting on my psychotherapy hat and building that therapeutic relationship. But very quickly, we get into this series of experiential exercises and meditations that I've developed over the past several years in my practice. And the goal, I would say, is to, first of all, just connecting my clients to their bodies and to their emotional experience. That's the most important thing to start. And we're also exploring some of this non-dual phenomenology that can emerge during the psychedelic experience, and essentially trying to simulate and really feel into these certain qualities that are commonly described of consciousness that are quite palpable, of the interconnectedness, the spaciousness, the inability to find a separate perceiver, things like that. We're exploring and deconstructing and opening up all these different aspects of it. And in a sense, doing exposure therapy around it, because it can be disorienting, it can be confusing, strange. People can have really interesting and sometimes strong nervous system reactions, even to very simple pointers. You've probably heard of the headless way.
Yes.
And some of the viewers may be familiar too. And I'll touch on that later. But sometimes even that simple pointer, relatively simple and quick, I've had people feel very uncomfortable and suddenly have a lot of fear come up. And so there's something there about your nervous system is used to operating within certain parameters and certain sort of sense of, this is what my frame of reality is, and that's getting tweaked and getting broken, and you're seeing the glitches in the user interface. And it can be upsetting. It can be interesting, it can be upsetting, it can be exciting. But it's important that we start to get your nervous system used to experiencing reality in this different way before we do the medicine. So that when it comes on, it's not as much of a surprise, not as much of a shock, and you can go deeper because it's already been kind of lubricated in a way before things happen. So yeah, that's essentially what it is. And I usually do. I'm very flexible with people, but I usually try to do 5 sessions at least, like before the journey. And so what I'm going to be offering to you and to the listeners here is basically like a condensed, intensive crash course, like through that. So usually this would be over about 5 weeks. Each session is about 50 minutes. And there would be a lot of time spent processing what happened in the previous week. And I assign homework and send people different recordings and things like that to work with. We're going to just do that quick and dirty version just to give people a sense of what it's like, and sort of a condensed version. And yeah, I guess just as a brief preview, as I see it, it's this kind of progression where we start off with Vipassana, specifically Vipassana on challenging emotional experiences. And the reason I start with that is because I am almost obsessed, I would say, as a therapist and as a guide, of really helping support people through connecting with their experience so that they don't have to take that really long spiritual bypassing detour that often we go on, including myself. How can we start with connection? And usually the first thing that people bypass instinctively, reflexively, is nervous system distress, right? So there's something that comes up, some kind of trigger. There's increase in heart rate, there's muscle tension or something. And so there's some reflexive reaction of the body and the mind to escape, whether that's, looking at your phone or just thinking a lot or whatever. And so that's where I start, is how do we get you in your body, connecting in real time in this very detailed curious way that we do with Vipassana. That's a positive curiosity there. And yeah, so that we're starting with connection, real-time connection with the emotional energy. That's huge. And if that's all we did, that would be an incredible gift to stop bypassing and start actually connecting with your anger, your sadness, because that's how you heal, actually, is by listening to it. So we start there. I'm just giving an overview, and then woven into that, there's some introduction to non-duality, and then as we get deeper, we're doing more and more non-dual investigations, and these may be familiar to viewers from other teachers such as Michael Taft or DeLulo. There's going to be a flavor of some of those non-dual meditations, and and hopefully, I don't know, a few surprises along the way. Maybe we'll see. And I guess maybe in the as we get to the end of it, there's sort of this interesting asymptotic thing happening that I don't even know what to call, but I just, for lack of a better word, I call it happeningness, which is just sort of like what starts to happen when you do the Vipassana, you kind of access non-duality, you feel like you're kind of more or less accessing that on demand, or it's sort of your new operating system. But then you start to realize that you're still holding on to the dead weight of the spiritual practitioner who's getting really good at non-duality and who's got non-duality. And that also, it feels like, needs to fall away because there's still some illusion of control there. And there's something else, and this is what I've been talking about with the salvia, that seems to emerge that's just the isness, that you don't have any control of whether you're surrendering to the experience or not, or whether you're suffering or not. And it's not even about suffering, it's not even about liberation. It's just right. What's happening exactly as it's happening in whatever form, dual, non-dual. And that's, I just call that happeningness. I don't know what else to call it.
Beautiful.
And
suchness.
Yeah. Although, that's an interesting, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but there's something about, because suchness I usually interpret, and I'll talk about this later when we do the visual stuff, coming from the Buddhists, like the study of like tathata, like this kind of quality to things that they're kind of shining with their own self-presencing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a Buddhist scholar, so maybe my subjective experience doesn't track with exactly what that term is intended to mean. But at least the way I experience that is like I'm looking at an object, and there's a sense of it being a separate object falling away, a sense of collapse between subject and object. And also there's some kind of a radiant, almost like, I don't know how to describe it, just almost a hallowed, or it feels like everything just feels very holy in a sense. It's like, it's so like this water bottle is just like so water bottle-y in this way that's so profound. And it's not, it can be literally shiny. There can be this way that the visual field actually gets like more illuminated. But that kind of luminosity, and this can be in any of the sense gates. That's what I use when I'm talking about suchness or tathata, is that sense of vivid radiance of the isness of things. And there's something subtle, and I feel like I'm still exploring this actively. I mean, of course I am. I'm never going to be done with this process, but where that still feels like a certain quality of the experience or something like that can also be conditional and can kind of come and go. Because I don't always look at a water bottle and lost in the rapture of like, wow, it looks like an object in a museum. It's like on a pedestal. It looks
the beatific vision.
The beatific version. Like sometimes I'm just drinking my water bottle and so that also comes and goes. It's not the thing, but this happeningness, again, I'm just making up words, and then and I don't even think I made that up. I think sometimes Shinzen Young talks about just happeningness. So it's not my coinage or whatever, but it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's sort of like things exactly as they're happening without there being any kind of stake in a particular quality of something being better than other. Because then it's like, oh, the suchness. Well, that's better than just seeing it as a plain old water bottle. So I guess I better be trying to cultivate that and getting better at seeing the suchness. Whereas it almost feels like there's this thing of like, well, sometimes it looks like that beatific version, and sometimes it doesn't. I can't control that because I can't even find a solid self in here who's control. And so there's something else that's just the way things are happening as they are, without any kind of expectation of any kind of spiritual extra thing going on. Maybe it's happening, maybe it's not.
It's the justice.
So I just wanted to disambiguate that a little bit.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, take us through.
Anyway, let's not get too down.
Nerd out.
Yeah. So, is there anything else I want to say? Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, I guess the one other thing I'll say intro wise is that I like to use the metaphor with the non-dual stuff of lucid dreaming a lot. And I know a lot of people may be lucid dreamers or maybe familiar with Andrew Holacek's work and Tibetan dream yoga and so forth.
I interviewed him actually.
I know.
I
love
really
his work.
cool.
He's really cool. Yeah, and such a like amazing like polymath, like pianist and humanitarian. Dentist. Like, whoa, yeah. But even if somebody has no contact whatsoever with lucid dreaming or has never had a lucid dream, and when we're talking about non-duality, I just like to frame what I mean when I'm talking about non-duality, because that's a really confusing buzzword too, is I just define it simply as, in this way, which is like, let's just imagine that right now, like you're having a lucid dream. And if you were having a lucid dream, and this was the senses that were presenting to you right now, or the scene, in theory, you would be able to look around at any object, you know, a phone or the Mr. Poopy over here, whatever. And like, you would have this sense, I'm just gonna use my water bottle. It's like, you would be able to know, oh, okay, so this is a lucid dream. This is all occurring in my mind and consciousness. So therefore, this, what appears to be a solid, like, plastic water bottle, it can't be made of plastic because this is happening in my mind, right? So it must be made of something else. Let's call that, I don't know, dream stuff, consciousness, or any word you want to use, pixels of consciousness. And so if you can have that realization in a dream, even as a thought experiment, you could also take it a step further and say, oh, well, that's true of everything. Like if I'm looking at my hands, looking at you, looking at whatever, the room, it's all made of the same stuff, if you will, like that consciousness. And it's not really a substance. It's just a way of describing it. But if you start to explore your waking reality in that way, I would say it's possible to notice that it's, in a sense, no different process-wise. Like from a lucid dream, you could say, you know, it's bounded by the senses, theoretically, but just that quality of everything being dreamlike, of everything being woven of the same fabric, there being no inherent separation of things, that becomes very palpable when you start to look at your experience very closely. And that's all I mean by non-duality, is just like noticing that. The fact that everything looks very solid and separate and 3D, and it looks like it's made of, you know, atoms and stuff and plastic and skin. But if you look more closely, you notice it's all made of consciousness. And I don't know what consciousness is, I'll say that. But that's just sort of a provisional term for a different way of looking at this. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of just like a guiding metaphor. And we will work with that, a little bit as we get into it. But yeah, that's all my intro. So are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready to rock.
All right.
Can you do me a favor? Just slide a little to your right.
A little on my right.
Get you a little more in frame. There we go. Perfect. Because we're doing meditation. This has to be perfect. Spiritual perfectionism. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start off with this sequence of 3 meditations. And I'll do kind of abbreviated versions. And these are kind of my 3 main ones that I introduce to people. And the other stuff we'll do later is more just playing around and looking at consciousness in the different senses and things like that. And the first one is called the hot stove meditation. And the reason I call it the hot stove meditation is it has to do with this notion that when you literally touch a hot stove, there's a reflexive protective response, which is a really amazing part of the nervous system that it does that. But that when it comes to other forms of pain, especially emotional pain, that reflexive avoidance or protective response is actually the opposite of what seems to be most healing. It's actually much more healing to metaphorically keep your hand on the hot stove of an uncomfortable emotional feeling, so that you can notice the nature of it as body sensation and as energy. And so that you can actually allow it to flow through you and discharge, just like animals are easily able to kind of shake things off. And so it's basically replacing a pattern of reflexive like avoidance, of reflexive approach and curiosity, and coming into connection and relationship in real time with your most uncomfortable emotions. And so the structure of it, just so you know what you're signing up for here before we actually start the meditation, because I'm doing a little more intro, is that first you will have to identify something that is a trigger for you. And you can share that with the audience if you want to. You don't have to. But we need something that's going to be your hot stove, because we have to, if we're going to work with your nervous system, this can't just be theoretical. We have to actually stir something up a little bit. And it should be something that I would say, usually the very first thing that comes to the top of your head is usually the best, I find. But we want to make sure it's carefully titrated so it makes you a little uncomfortable, gives us enough stuff in the body to work with. So it's something that you're pretty sure if you started really thinking about it, you'd probably feel something. Maybe your heart would increase a little bit or something like that. And then once that we kind of turn on the hot stove, so to speak, then I'm going to guide you on connecting with that using this kind of Vipassana skill of just using your attention almost like a microscope, of just going in and just noticing all the physical sensations of that in as much detail as possible in real time. And I'll guide you through that. And, to listeners who are like non-dual people, they might be like, wait, you're talking about attention and like microscope. And so, yes, this is a dualistic meditation, just to be clear, because that's where we start. We gotta just build these skills of just noticing what's happening in the body. We'll get to the non-dual stuff later. And then in the meditation, we'll do that to a certain point in time, to the point where your nervous system activation is starting to decrease. And so you'll feel like a wave of discomfort. And then as you notice it, it's natural that you'll notice the discharge, which is an amazing realization, because you realize, oh my God, my body just has the capacity to just spontaneously process uncomfortable feelings when I simply make space for them, connect with them, as opposed to contracting away from them. And then once we get to that point, then we start to shift into the non-dual way of opening, and we'll start to make some space or notice space in the mind for those sensations to open up and expand. So some of the pressurization and the feeling of not having enough room for it is alleviated by noticing the boundlessness of the field of consciousness. So it's kind of a 3-part thing. It's like turn on the stove, put your hand on it, keep it there, notice all the feelings, notice that you're not actually getting burned, even though your nervous system might be freaking out. You're actually building a healed relationship with whatever this is. And then we're relaxing into spaciousness. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and most of this is going to be silent, but there will be an interactive part, and I'll prompt you. And that'll be when I'm asking you about what you're feeling in your body. And I'll make sure to frame that so it's clear. And I'll ask you what you're feeling in real time, and we'll kind of explore that together. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So for you, do you have something that's popped up for you that you think, if I brought that to mind, it's probably going to make me a little uncomfortable, and I think it would give me something to work with, but it's not going to ruin the rest of my day?
Yeah, I think I have something.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll keep it to myself.
Okay, yeah, you don't have to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is true for my clients too. They don't have to tell me what it is. Okay. All right. So you ready to begin? Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to close my eyes with you, so I'll get in the flow with you. And we'll just start by taking a few moments just to settle, just to kind of arrive right here and now, and getting into your senses. So noticing the feeling of your body in the chair, the humming of the camera, sensations of your breath. Okay, good. And so now I'm going to ask you to turn on this hot stove. So what that means is whatever this thing is that's got your goat, I want you to really open up that Pandora's box actively. However that you get there, is that could be visualizing this catastrophe, it could be repeating this negative self-talk, whatever it is, just kind of charge it up. It's like you're putting your hand on the stove and you're really just soaking yourself in whatever feelings are there and amping them up. And now this is the interactive part. I'd like you to share with me, what are you noticing happening in your body as you bring this discomfort to mind? What do you notice?
It's like an energetic, a tightening in the chest.
Okay.
Like, yeah, a hotness or a tightening in the chest.
Gotcha. So, okay, so heat and tightness in the chest. Good. And I want to know even more details. So this tightness, how big is that? Would you say, is it like the size of your hand? Is it smaller, bigger?
It's hard to say. It's
okay.
Very vague and
yeah, you can just notice
I'd say it's kind of chest sized.
Okay, so it feels like your whole chest is tensed up. Yeah. And does it feel like it's on the surface, like there's a weight on your chest, or is it more like a gripping in your chest?
Yeah, it's like a deeper gripping.
Deeper gripping. Gotcha. And is it constant, or is there some sense of change? Like, is it pulsing? Is it vibrating? Is anything shifting?
It kind of comes in a little bit of waves.
Okay. So we're just noticing in real time just how this is unfolding. And tell me more about this heat. So does it feel like a dull heat? Is it like a burning, prickling? Can you describe it for me?
It's very dull, and it's actually changed.
Yeah, tell me more.
So now it's more of a flickering kind of butterfly-y type.
Butterfly, gotcha.
Ugh.
And does the heat feel the same size as the tightness, or is it smaller, bigger?
I think the heat is gone, and now it's just this. I guess the best way to describe it is a nervous energy, almost like butterflies, but in the chest.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's changed quite a bit.
And are you getting any colors with these? Sometimes people have colors that come up. Maybe you are, maybe you're not.
Not so much.
Not so much. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so there's kind of this butterfly sensation in your chest. Yeah. Any other parts of your body? And you may have to return to the memory or whatever it is, or the anxiety, to charge it up again in this phase, because we're just really trying to get to know it intimately in real time. Any other parts of your body besides your chest that might be acting up?
Yeah, I think my hands and my legs feel tight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hands and legs. Is the tightness in your hands the same in the right and left, or is there any difference?
It's worse in the left.
Worse in the left. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's more tight there. And in your legs, where is the tightness exactly? Where do you feel it?
Oh, kind of the left thigh and the right foot, actually.
Left thigh, right foot. Got it. And are you noticing any changes, ripples, contractions, anything getting more or less intense?
Yeah, the whole thing kind of fluxes.
Okay. Flux, good. Anything else that you're noticing in your body that we haven't named yet?
There's some twitching in the left upper arm that just started.
Yeah. Just started. Fast twitch, slow twitch?
Slow twitch, and it
slow twitch.
Stopped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So this is where you can get a break from the interactive part, and I'll just guide you a little bit. So, I want you to just continue to be with these sensations, listening to them with this kind of compassionate, mindful presence, this curiosity, just really wanting to know this feeling. What is it? What's happening here? And so you can scan through these different parts of your body, your chest, your legs, your hands, your arm, anywhere where that's getting lit up. And using your attention almost like a microscope, like, can I get a little closer, a little deeper to that particular part? And having curiosity about these different qualities. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it tight? Is it loose? Is it prickly? Is it dull? Whatever. Just noticing. And without any agenda, there's no need to change it or make it go away. Just this deep, connective listening. And at this point, if you feel like you're actively holding on to the hot stove, the trigger, you can let go of needing to kind of recharge whatever it is. And now just stay with whatever residual phenomena there are in the body. So now we're just noticing the trail of energy, whatever's happening in your body. Okay, good. And we're going to shift gears and do a very similar process, but just noticing this other sense gate of the mind space, you could say, or your thoughts. And this is where you can share, again, your experience. But I'm curious if you're noticing any residues in your mind and your thoughts in terms of any images, any words or phrases. And this isn't about the content of the thoughts as much as just the process. Noticing, is there negative talk? Is it loud? Is it soft? Are there images? Are they sharp? That kind of thing. So anything happening mentally, cognitively for you in the trail of this experience you brought up that you're noticing.
It's a little disjointed. There's some images of body that are associated with the feelings in the body that are still quite prominent.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an image of chest, say, or arm or hand. There's some reflection on the process itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to know more about the quality of these thoughts. So you mentioned images of the body parts, and those images, would you, if we temporarily just don't worry about the content or what they mean, but we're focusing on them almost like an aesthetic experience or like watching a piece of art or something, would you say those images are like sharp, or are they dull? Are they colorful? Or are they black and white? How would you describe the quality of those images?
Very vague and indistinct and ephemeral.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how big they are? Like, they feel like they're inside your head? Are they outside your head? Where are they? What size are they?
They seem to fill wherever the sense space is of sensation in the body. They seem to be located there, like behind the eyes, but also in the chest, also in the legs.
Gotcha.
They fill whatever space is noticed by sensation.
And you mentioned some reflection on the process. Was that taking the form of words, like sounds in your mind?
It's
Why is that?
It's a vague conceptual sense. It's not specifically auditory or linguistic. It's just this sense of, oh, watching mind.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So now tell me, would you say in your nervous system, the activation level in terms of how intense this discomfort is, would you say it's the same as it was at the beginning when we first started? Or has it decreased at all?
It's very much decreased in intensity, and quality has changed.
Okay, excellent. And so this is the magic of Vipassana, because as we notice, when we notice the feelings, they do actually go away on their own, which is kind of an extraordinary gift of the nervous system. We just make space and we just notice. The intensity always will decrease at a certain point in time. Sometimes it takes longer, but everything's always changing. So it does diminish. Okay, good. So you can remain silent for the remainder of this meditation. And what we're going to do next is just continuing to notice whatever sensations might be there. And they might be quite faint at this point. Maybe there are other sensations that have come in. And this is all the sensations, right? Sensations of the body, sensations of the mind. We're really treating those equally as parts of your experience to notice. And we're going to give them a little more space to breathe. So sometimes when difficult experiences come up, there can be a feeling of it being trapped, like inside the body or inside the head. Like there's no room for these things. And so we're going to start opening up into the edgelessness of experience. One of the simple ways to do this is simply looking through your closed eyelids. And you may have a sense of looking into deep space, not seeing any corners or edges or boundaries. And there may be some feeling of expansion there. And you can also do a similar thing with your sense of hearing. So if you hear out farther and farther, you'll notice there's no boundary. Like there's no place where you hear where your hearing ends. And so there can be this feeling of expansive edgelessness in the sound field too. And when we contact that boundlessness, there can be a lot more room for all of these sensations, whatever might be left to breathe. And you can actually use a visualization to allow this expansion to happen, to accelerate it even. Any lingering feelings or residues you may have in your chest or your arms, or if there's certain thoughts bouncing around that feel a bit coagulated or something, you can actually imagine them getting larger and larger. They don't have any inherent size or shape, so we can play around with tweaking that, and we can imagine it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually the collection of sensations can get so large that it's opening out into this boundlessness. And of course, we're not trying to get rid of these feelings. We're actually just giving them their fullest expression. Like a bunch of butterflies in a jar. We're opening the jar and letting them flutter in the sky. Okay, good. And so at this point, you can just relax any sense of effort of trying to make something happen or do anything in the meditation. Just resting, letting go of any sense of effort or control, just letting sensations do what they're doing. Okay, great. So you can now slowly open your eyes whenever you're ready. And in these transition moments, just noticing how the same qualities of consciousness sensation are still here. We didn't go anywhere different. We're not coming back to anywhere. Yeah. So that is the hot stove meditation. And yeah, I'm curious if you want to share anything. Of course, you don't have to say what your trigger was, but about your experience. I'd love to hear about
it. So much of it is ineffable.
Yeah, and that's okay.
I'll say this. Yeah, it starts with the thought trigger, that sense of tightness, burning, all the physical sensations. Then that really starts to modulate, and it really almost becomes a natural body. Like these sensations in the body are just everything. Mm-hmm. Then the expansion part of it just allowed another degree of release, because there was no longer a mental construction holding these in a space that was being labeled body.
Yeah.
So now it was just in a field of open this. Mm-hmm. And then the more that relaxed, the story that triggered the whole thing, that was gone. It wasn't arising. They're just the sensations where they are, thoughts where they are, sound where it is. And then when you had me open my eyes, the visual field was exactly the same as that. Mm. One sort of spacious, yeah, I can't say another word about it, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I I can't say any words about what you just said. It's so beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So this is the first technique that I teach clients. This is usually session 3. The first session is psychotherapy intake, and then we do logistical stuff, safety stuff. But then this is kind of the main practice that I teach people. And yeah, it's kind of a rinse and repeat thing, where I just encourage people do it as a concentrated practice. And just throughout the day, anytime you notice, oh, I'm stuck in something that's just got me, just repeat, even in miniature, that exercise of, okay, what's my body doing right now? Let me first answer that question. Because usually the first place we bypass is by thinking.
Yeah.
So we get in there, oh, okay, oh gosh, whatever, my chest is tighter, my stomach's in a knot. And then you're sitting with that. And then it never fails. Like, if you just do that long enough, and it's usually not that long, like sometimes it's just less than 5 minutes for most people. You start here, but then eventually you notice, oh, I'm here now. And then you keep doing it, oh, I'm here. And then I think the wheels start turning for people of, the nervous system has a natural capacity of discharging stress on its own, like without having to do anything or escape. And that's a huge gift. And it's a big shift from spending life in patterns of avoidance, right? Which is where
conditioned to do it.
Yeah, our condition. Yeah.
We all do it.
Yeah.
Do you find with clients who have less meditation experience than I do, because one thought that just arose was, would this be, and I'm sure people in the comments will be doing this with us and will weigh in, is there a lot more, maybe a perceived difficulty in not getting caught in the thought narrative that can inevitably arise, and then bring back to the body, back to the sensations? Because for me, through lots of practice, that becomes much easier. So in your experience with clients that are maybe new to this, do they find that they're able to drop into the body and follow your instructions?
I am continuously shocked by how easy this is for the vast majority of people who have had no meditation experience. And I have to give them a little more coaching. We're doing this, of course, in a condensed, miniaturized version. But I give them, it's almost like a little set of guidelines where I say, I'm going to be asking you some questions about what you're experiencing. And here's the kind of things we're looking for. And here's the kind of things we're not looking for. Because, of course, for most people who don't have an experience of meditation, if I tell them, okay, think of something difficult, now tell me what's happening in your body, people will say, oh, well, yesterday my body was, I don't know, I was just feeling kind of tired. But like right now, I'm feeling kind of, or whatever. It's like a very vague kind of narrative. Right. Or like, yeah, but I tell people it's always going to be, as much as possible, like real time, what you're actually experiencing. And the more details you can get, the better. So I'll give people keywords. I'll be like, things like hot, cold, like prickly, or and this actually comes from Goenka. That's one of the great benefits of that practice.
The noting.
Yeah, the noting. Well, that's the Mahasi is the noting, but the I mean, Goenka would always talk about, is it hot, is it cold, is it dull, is it sharp, all these qualities. And then when I really prepare people for that, it's very rare that somebody still is going into story about the past or the future. Like, well, when you ask me about my body, now I'm feeling anxious that I have this exam tomorrow or that doctor. It's like, well, wait a second, what are you feeling right now? Like in your stomach? Sometimes I have to redirect, but I prepare people, and then they do get right into it. And I'm really amazed sometimes, no meditation practice whatsoever. And someone will be saying, well, gosh, now that I'm looking, I just noticed that I have this funny yellow fuzzy feeling on the right side of my stomach. I've never noticed that before. And it's it's prickly, and now it's changing. Oh, now it's getting bigger. It's, just all these things. And people are, and it's sounding like a psychedelic experience. The way people are describing it, sometimes there are colors, there are shapes, there are, people will say these things like in my head, I feel like there's a cave of darkness and it's raining, and I feel this moisture. I mean, all sorts of stuff.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And I'm often bowled over by that. Yeah.
So much of it in the experience here was, because I've done this myself, but your guidance and questions are crucial to redirect where attention seems to be falling. And when you say actually let go of all doing, then that actually just happens, because at that point it's almost a hypnotic suggestion, which I found very useful. And because you want to tell stories about these sensations that aren't necessarily accurate to what it's actually feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
Like sometimes if you'd say what color it was, I'd go, well, it really isn't a color.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah, which is good.
One thing I'll say is I don't always include this. There was an extra step I kind of threw in there last minute. I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and put it in, which is also doing Vipassana on your thought stream.
Right.
And I don't always do that with I'm trying to give you like a sampler platter in the audience of like these different practices. And I hope people will consider this all like open source, like just take it and do whatever you want with it.
Take pieces that work,
or change the order of things, whatever. But yeah, because sometimes I think that noticing thoughts as sensations is a little bit of a longer walk. It's very unfamiliar for people because thoughts are content, they're story. For people, they're not sensations. So I don't sometimes start with that, or I don't necessarily do that the first. I might just do the body.
Right.
And then later it might be like, okay, are you ready to now do that same principle and apply that to the thought stream?
That makes sense. Yeah. Because it can be hard at first. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll do it in a different order too. Because I noticed I probably, if I had to do a redo, I probably would have prompted you to notice all the thought stuff prior to asking you to stop actively recharging. Because I think it was a little too late, and then I caught you. I was starting to do the thoughts, but you were like, "It's really vague and disjointed." And I was thinking, well, you're probably feeling that way because I sort of, midstream decided to.
We disengaged the trigger.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, and I didn't say this because it wasn't during a period where it was interactive, but a thought arose of the trigger again, and the body lit up with the response. But the response was just like and gone.
Yeah.
And the thought itself was gone because there wasn't an intention set to continue to try to hold it.
Yeah. It's a very strange meditation in a way. And actually, Andrew Holacek, his other book, or his most recent book, Reverse Meditation, kind of does this very similar thing. I loved that book. I just read it recently. And I thought, wow, this is so great. This is similar to what I've been doing. And yeah,
excuse me.
I don't think there's like a right way to do this. And I often am experimenting with people. I'm like, oh, maybe I should put this before that. Or, one thing I used to do, for example, is I would used to start people off doing a lot of relaxation and do kind of like a body scan to settle the nervous system. But then I would find actually that people were too relaxed. And that when they would come for the trigger, they'd be like, I'm not really feeling much. Yeah. So nowadays I just quick settle in, do the trigger, boom. And then we'll do the body stuff. And then, like I said, I probably should have done the thoughts first and then ask you to let go.
Hey, it
whatever.
still worked perfect.
Yeah,
it was exactly right.
It's sort of like a modular thing, and you can sort of slide.
And you're feeling
around.
It out with each client.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that's that. Yeah.
So what's the next one? I'm excited. That was really cool.
Cool. Okay, so the next one is, I call this floating in space.
One last thing. When the trigger was felt, it was really uncomfortable. Like I could feel it. I think I was cringing a little bit because it has an energetic signature that the mind naturally recoils from. And I've done this. Is kind of similar to the Fetter work, where you're feeling reactivity and you're sitting with it, and it's supposed to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and it does. Yeah. And so people, I think, should know that that's part of it.
Yes, yes. This is exposure therapy.
Exactly.
Too. That's been another inspiration for me. And essentially, I think of this as like, my training in exposure therapy plus Vipassana plus non-dual into some kind of exercise that integrates those things.
Beautiful. Okay.
So the next thing, I call this floating in space. And this is kind of it's a progression and deeper into the non-dual stuff. It's sort of a halfway step, as you'll see. Because then after that, we have this thing called Ocean of Love. That's the third one. But floating in space, actually, we'll start off with just, I'm trying to think if I want to, let me give just really quick, I don't like to talk about these things too much because it's like, let's just do the practice, but just a really quick framing. So I always was interested in the skandhas, the 5 skandhas model. And again, I'm not a Buddhist scholar, so some people might say, you're not getting those quite right. But I know that there's, I believe it's called sana, perceptions, I think it's translated. And then there's formations, the sankharas, I think it's called, or sankharas. I might be getting this slightly wrong, but whatever. I'm not an academic. But anyway, I think those are really interesting terms. I like to use that to distinguish. We're going to be investigating our like physical experience and playing with that and deconstructing that, like in the body and touch. And so I just want to distinguish before we get into it that, if you have a sensory experience, like for example, I'm holding my fist, and this is painting in broad strokes because you could say a million things about this experience. But if I were to divide this into, broadly speaking, like two different buckets, it's like, okay, there's kind of a just raw sensory bucket, of just like, yeah, okay, there's pressure, the Vipassana kind of stuff we talked about. There's maybe some coolness, and there's, I don't know, my hands are slightly moist or whatever, compared to the outside. My skin is drier here. All these just sensations we're noticing. And there's a story there too, of course, but that's a more, less constructed version of just the sensations that are happening. But then there's this way that it feels like our mind takes the kind of raw sensory data and sort of squeezes it into the particular form and a more kind of constructed story of, and this is, a hand, and it's my right hand, and it belongs to me. And I use my hands in these various ways, and I have, certain parts of my hand that I know are sensitive or maybe painful or arthritic, whatever you have going on in your hand. And you kind of, so you're basically taking the raw flow of just the sensation field, and then you're taking that and you're squeezing it, you could say, or shaping it into, and there's kind of an image going on, at least for, sometimes people have aphantasia when they work with me. So it's like, okay, you're not actually imagining it.
Yeah.
And so we have to do different meditations. So I try to accommodate people. But for most folks I work with, yeah, there's some kind of sense of there's sensations, but I'm also imagining the shape of it, and I'm imagining it being separate. I'm imagining my separate fingers and things like that. So I like to just talk broadly speaking about, and maybe this corresponds loosely to the perceptions and formations, skandhas kind of thing, where there's the
name and form,
yeah.
and yeah.
It's like, okay, there's a sensory feeling, then there's sort of like what I'm adding on to that experience. So basically what we do in this meditation is we try to get in touch as much as possible with that more simple, just sensory layer of just what's happening as energy in the body, sort of like we did with the previous meditation. And then we become aware of what are the ways that we are taking those sensations and sort of adding on these extra kind of layers of visualization. So if, taking a pressury feeling and making it into a fist by visualizing a fist, that extra layer. And can we start to peel back the layers of the onion and start to let go of the formations layer, or that sort of story layer, and just get more into the sort of fluidity of the sensations. And we can do that by dropping it. And we can also do it by using our imagination and visualization to make it different. I mean, you could have a pressury feeling. You could imagine that your fist is, shaped like a cube, for example. And if you kept doing that as a practice, you'd probably actually feel like you had this cube fist, you know what I'm saying? Because our mind is that malleable. And so what we're doing as we play and as we peel back the layers of the onion, we're starting to get in touch, again, returning to this lucid dreaming metaphor of, oh, this looks like, a hand gripping a phone or whatever. But if I do some practices to really investigate what's going on there, it's really much more of like this collection of pressury sensations and coolness and warmth and things like that my mind is positioning right here and is imagining is that particular size. And then I'm imagining there's a hand, and I'm imagining the phone, and then it's made of glass, and it's made of plastic, and this is separate. Like all that stuff is added on.
Conceptual proliferation.
Yeah, and if you just like let go of all that stuff, it's like, there's just this thing. I don't even know what to call it that's happening here.
Yeah.
And when we get in touch with that, that's really interesting, because then you start to see how the nature of sensory experience, and we're focusing right now on kind of the haptic or tactile experience, it really doesn't feel like what you thought it was. It doesn't feel like things are solid or separate. There's sort of this almost fluid or almost like clay-like feeling of things just kind of squish into each other like lava lamps, or that kind of sense of interpenetration or boundaries starts to fall away. And so then you're starting to feel that dreamlike, lucid dreaming kind of nature of consciousness in your haptic field, right? Or in your kind of sensory field. So that's basically what we're doing. And and as we do that, we're also letting go of certain images that we carry of like the map, for example, of like the room and the architecture and the furniture and stuff like that. And so that opens up into space. That's why I call it floating in space. So I don't want to give too many spoilers, because we can. Ready to begin?
Let's do it.
Okay. And this one's less meditation-y, more just kind of, let's just fuck around with consciousness and
perfect.
See
Eyes
the glitches
open,
in the
typically?
matrix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Start with eyes open. But soon we'll close our eyes. So I want you to take your hands and put them together like this. So there's very little space between the palms, and then interlace them like this, kind of like a supplication prayer pose or whatever. And now you can go ahead and close your eyes, and I want you to just do the Vipassana thing of just firing up your concentration, just noticing all the sensations that are here. So that might be pressure, that might be temperature, coolness, dryness, pain, dullness, just whatever's here. Just noticing this cloud of sensations that are here. So that's that kind of first layer of just sensation. And then we can also start to notice, well, how are we storying these sensations? And so there's probably a story here about, okay, you've got your hands, and there's the right hand, the left hand, and they're clasping each other, this size and this shape. So let's play with that a little bit and see how that works. So what I want you to do is actually try on a particular story and hold on to it. And this story is going to be that your right hand is the one that's giving the touch, and the left hand is receiving the touch. So those are the roles of these two hands. And just notice when you hold on to that version of this experience, it changes the overall experience, because experience is this kind of sensation plus the story or the visual. And so if you're visualizing, okay, my right hand is the one that's giving the touch, the left hand is receiving. It takes a little bit of effort. You got to hold on to it, and it shifts the experience. It nudges it in a certain direction. Same sensations. I mean, they're always changing, but it's essentially the pressure, the warmth, all that stuff, but just different shape, different story. And now we can flip it, right? So you can say, oh, let's drop that, and let's imagine that the left hand is the hand that's giving the touch and the right hand is receiving. And hold on to that. And you might notice the experience changes a little bit, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, even though your nerve endings are probably more or less having the same sensations, but you visualize it differently. So the whole experience feels different. And we can see how we shape our sensory experience in the body through our concepts. Okay, so now we can get a little more playful and psychedelic here. And so I want you to visualize now that there is no difference between your left hand and your right hand. That's just a story. Let's just drop the whole left hand, right hand thing. And instead imagine that your hands have kind of fused together, and all that's here is this singular hand blobby thing in front of you. So there's no more left or right. There's no more space between. There's no more boundary between your hands. There's just this mysterious mass of coagulated fingers with all these sensations. And if that's the new story, it can start to feel a little trippy. Weird stuff can start to happen. And people tell me all sorts of things like, oh, my hands feel like a blob, or my hands just disappeared. I wonder, are you feeling anything funky or different?
Yeah, when that story drops, then it's just this ball of energy.
Yeah, that's the next thing that I sometimes have people do is like, well, you can also just stop visualizing your hands, right? And then it's just like, whoa, there's this weird like electron cloud floating in front of my chest. That's weird. And so this is, for you, this is probably old hat, but for a lot of first-time people, something is happening here. It's like, oh, I thought I had these things made of bone and flesh and skin that were hands that belonged to me and that were right and left. And wow, you can actually just let go of all that story, and suddenly it becomes something that feels energetic and fluid and interconnected. And so we're starting to really, in this very direct, palpable way, notice this dreamlike nature of consciousness as it's arising in particular in the body and the body sensations. Okay, great. So keep your eyes closed. We're going to just move on through to the next step. And there's sometimes an intermediary step. I'm just, again, doing this in real time, seeing what I want to do or not do, where I have people put their palms on their thighs. And just so people know, it's just a similar kind of exercise where you notice. I'm going to skip it because I think you're ready for the next one, just for the sake of time. But you just notice like the feelings of the interface of your hands and your thighs. And similarly, you can collapse that difference. And so instead of feeling like my hands are separate than my thighs, you might feel like your hands are melting into your thighs, or your hands are disappearing, or people report all sorts of other just wacky psychedelic phenomena. And again, this is like you're having a psychedelic experience before you are trying a psychedelic, which is the whole point here. So you get really familiar with just feeling the wacky, generated on the fly, just fluid nature of consciousness when you're, not under the influence. So that when things start melting together, things start disappearing, things start expanding into energy, it's not a surprise. It doesn't shock your nervous system. But let's move along, because I think, this will be too easy for you. We'll go to something a little more interesting or challenging. And so now we're actually going to shift to your feet. And it helps if your feet are planted on the floor. Are they? Okay. And same kind of setup here. So you're going to start just by noticing the sensations on the bottom of your feet. So whatever's there, the pressure, the feelings of texture of the carpet or whatever, all those little micro sensations, all those nerve endings there in the bottoms of your feet, just noticing what they're picking up. Okay, good. So now that's a sensory layer. Now we're going to look at the story layer. So there might be a story in your mind that your feet are planted on the carpet and the floor. And then underneath that, there's the rest of the building. And then underneath that, there's the foundation of the building. Underneath that, there's the earth, etc. So there's all this story that might be in place around architecture and being on terra firma, just everything that's underneath, that's supporting your feet right now. And let's start playing with that and peeling back the onion here and starting to parse out, well, what is a direct sensory experience that you're noticing in real time versus what is kind of a memory trace or just a mental image that's structuring that experience. And at least for me, I would say that, if I'm noticing my feet, the only thing that's a direct sensory experience is that kind of just feeling of pressure, prickliness, heat, whatever that I'm associating with the bottoms of my feet. Everything else underneath that, the carpet, the floor, especially when we're getting down deeper, it's like, okay, the foundation, you're not touching any of that, right? So there's actually no way that any of that stuff underneath you could be a direct sensation. Like you can experience the sensations of carpet texture, but you're not actually experiencing as a sensory feeling the carpet itself. Like the carpet itself is a story. It's an image. And the same is true with the foundation, the earth, etc. You're not feeling the earth right now. You're only feeling foot sensations. So here's an interesting step. If you let go of all the extra stuff, all the story and the images, something might open up. There might feel like there's just emptiness, like underneath you. It might feel like you're just like kind of floating in space and suddenly there's no ground supporting you. It can actually feel quite vertiginous or scary even. Like the floor is just dropped out from under you because you're just not visualizing it anymore. But I'm wondering, what about your experience, Zubin? Like what's happening for you with this right now?
Yeah. It's just a floating, disembodied cloud of sensation.
Yeah.
When the floor story dropped out. And I did get a little vertiginous.
Yeah, that's normal. Mm-hmm. Right? It's very unfamiliar because the mind, and this is the interesting thing, is the mind is constantly regenerating. Mm-hmm. It's like a background process that you don't realize is there, but it's constantly regenerating floor and architecture and earth and room and furniture and all this stuff, because that makes us feel at home, like we're, everything is solid, everything's familiar, everything's being reinforced. But you don't have to be running that background process all the time. You can turn it off, and it's actually quite relaxing to do so because your mind isn't doing extra work. And it can be a little scary because it's like, oh, it feels like, where did the ground go? And sometimes if people have a hard time with this, you got this very quickly, of course. I'll do a halfway step. We'll imagine that they're floating almost on like a magic carpet or just like a square of floor. So they're like, okay, I can still feel the floor under my feet, but then we remove everything else under that. Because some people have a hard time letting go of what their feet are immediately touching. But then I'll get them to the next step where we let go of that square too. And then, there's nothing underneath you. And it's almost not even nothing, because that's another concept. It's just not a thing. Like, there's just nothing. I don't even know what to call it. It's just not represented in consciousness when it's not being created. So you just can't access it. And this is actually true. This is why I call this floating in space. This is true in any direction. You may have already anticipated this, but you can notice, foot sensations. What's under my feet? Well, if it's a direct body sensation, there's nothing because I can't feel anything. And you could do the same with, let's say, your back, right? So you could feel the sensations on your back and get really in touch with those. And you could say, like, what's directly behind those sensations on my back that is still like a direct body sensation in real time that I'm noticing, as opposed to just a story or a memory trace. And of course, maybe there's a moment of like, the chair, but okay, I can drop the chair. Maybe there's a wall behind you, right? But okay, you can drop the wall. And you can just keep doing this in any direction. And so you could go left, you could go right, you could notice your chest, you could notice the top of your head, all those sensations that are there. And then ask yourself, well, what's above my head? That's a direct body sensation that I'm really feeling in my nervous system, as opposed to some memory or a visual. And if you're visualizing the ceiling, well, you can just let go of that. And you can replace it with sky, you can replace it with space, you replace it with anything because it's just an image. Or you just don't have to visualize anything. And then there's just this very curious feeling. It sounds like you're already having this. And maybe you keep the body, maybe the body's starting to dissolve. But for most people at this stage, it's just we're holding onto the body, but there's just nothing else around you, because all that you're experiencing directly in your nervous system, as opposed to all these memories that you're having that are constructing your experience, is just your body, and then there's just space. Or it feels like boundlessness. And so this is a very interesting place to kind of hang out, because it feels like there's nothing much to do. It's almost this kind of womb-like feeling of just floating. And it's very, very relaxing for most people. Once the vertigo settles down, it's just, wow, just hanging out, nothing to do. My mind doesn't have to construct all these things. I don't have to keep reassuring myself that I'm on solid ground and that gravity is still functioning. I can just let go of all that and just float. And also just noticing, wow, all this stuff that I thought was solid, like the furniture and in the room, that's just an idea. As it's actually showing up in real time in consciousness subjectively, it's just an image in my mind that I can just drop, and then it's just gone. And so again, we're seeing the nature of our experience not as this world of objects, solid separate objects that we thought, but actually something very different. You could call it consciousness, you could call it a dream. It's this kind of spontaneous arising of these sensations, moment by moment. So that's floating in space. So what are you feeling right now, Zubin?
I love it. Yeah, it is just the sensations and the impermanence of it. there's nowhere to there's nowhere to stand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the mind does come and try to reconstruct bits. Oh, chair's here. Let it go. Just sensations. Oh, Mira's over there. No, she's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And of course, none of that is any problem. It's kind of, this is the sort of pendulum swing. We're going from this rigid duality that most of us are in into this experience of unity, which is very good preparation for the 5-MeO full release, where everything just feels like just one. But that's not the be all end all state, right? Okay, the mind does construct things, and that's fine, right? It's like, but it's helpful to go, I find, all the way into that spectrum of just where everything just feels like it's just energy or whatever. It's everything's one, and then you can settle the mind back into whatever it happens to be doing, and not needing to nudge it in any particular direction because there's nobody doing that anyway. There's no control. I'm tempted to let's just go straight through into the next part, which is, I call this ocean of love, because it's actually just segues right into it. Usually I split this up over a couple weeks with people, but we can just go right into it since we're just doing this crash course, if that's okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So now that we're just floating in space, just like this baby, what we're going to do is continue to play around with these images that we have that are structuring this experience. And we're also going to invite the separation between body and space to dissolve, because that's another boundary we've constructed, right? And so we could do this with the space metaphor. I find it's helpful and intuitive for some people to replace the spacious sky with the ocean, another classic kind of Tibetan metaphor. So the first thing you'll do is just that sense of floating in space, just simply mentally replace space with water. So now you're totally aware of your body sensations, and everything else has just been dissolved into this vast, infinite ocean. I like to call this ocean of love because sometimes people experience this sense of isolation, or like, oh my God, I'm just all alone in this ocean. And I find it's helpful for people to introduce a little bit of metta at this point, emotionally, energetically, to soften this move into dissolving into everything. And so you can do that by just a kind of mini metta, by just bringing anybody in your life, or any animal that you love, or pet, or just anyone you have a relationship with, that when you bring them to mind, there's this little heartburst of just joy and appreciation for that person, or that animal, or that being. And just allow the effervescence of that love energy to just permeate this ocean. So if it happened to feel like this kind of cold, forbidding, isolated ocean, perhaps now it has more of a quality to it that is more like an ocean of love, like something that is holding, womb-like, keeping you safe, completely open to whatever experiences you're having, and just holding those without any kind of judgment. And now we're going to play just a little bit in this ocean with letting go of some more structures that we have in place that may even be unconscious. So we've let go of a lot of things, the furniture, the earth, all this stuff. And there's still things here about how big you are, and maybe what left and right is, and up and down, and things like that. And the more we let go of these structures, there might be some fear. And on the other side of that, there tends to be deeper relaxation as we're just letting go into this kind of unity. And so you can kind of play around. These are almost like stretches for your mind. So this body that we're still keeping, this body floating in the ocean, you can do some kind of transformations with it. These are just visualizations. So you can imagine yourself, for example, spinning. So you could imagine your body spinning to the left. or clockwise or counterclockwise, however you're imagining your body in space, just spinning one direction. And noticing when you do this, our minds are so powerful that you can actually induce sometimes a feeling of vertigo or even mild nausea simply by visualizing your body spinning in a certain direction. And then you can slow down and you can spin the opposite direction. What we're doing here is just kind of playfully confusing our sense of orientation of where are we, what's left, what's right, where are we in space, where are we in the room, all that sort of stuff. Okay, good. And you can also do this by imagining your body moving upward in space, almost like going up in an elevator. And you might feel something in your stomach, like an actual elevator sensation. Some acceleration down in your gut, perhaps. And then you can do the opposite. So imagine now you're falling, just falling deeper and deeper into this ocean of love and noticing whatever sensations are there of just falling. There's no ocean floor, so you just keep falling. Okay, good. And now we're just going to do a free-form transformation. This is kind of like when you go to like a state fair, they have those weird human gyroscope things where you strap in and it kind of moves you all around like a ball. So just imagine your body just moving, just freestyle, like whatever feels natural. And it's like your body's in the same position, same posture, but it's just kind of moving around. Maybe it's spinning, maybe it's flipping forwards or backwards. Maybe it's slow, maybe it's fast. And as we're doing this, we're just stretching our mind out so it's looser and looser, so that we're just not holding so tightly to north, south, east, west, up, down, left, right, all these orientations and directions and stuff like that. And then just coming to rest, and maybe things feel the same as they did before, but maybe things just feel a little looser. Like maybe it's not quite as clear to you right now where exactly you're pointed, where north is or south. Maybe that just feels a little lighter, a little softer. And there's just almost a sense of like, where even am I? Like floating in this ocean, like where's the ocean? I don't even know. And we can also play with scale. So you might be imagining your body in a certain size that you're familiar with relative to, the chair or the table or whatever. And see what it's like to play with that too. So you can imagine your body getting smaller and smaller, like shrinking down to the size of like a little ant. And you can also reverse that and imagine your body getting larger and larger up to like King Kong dimensions or Godzilla dimensions. And of course, there's nothing to compare it to, so you can't even know how big you are because there's no other objects here. So we're just, again, stretching out, defamiliarizing these usual stories of who we think we are, how big we are. Okay, good. And come to rest. So maybe, maybe it feels a little fuzzy, like how big are you? Or where are you? And yeah, if it feels weird, that's usually good because it means that something familiar is relaxing and letting go. Okay, good. So now comes the really trippy parts, psychedelic part. I want you to imagine that your body is made of salt. So same shape, same position, but it's like somehow you've magically been cast as like a salt sculpture. And this is kind of that no body skin I was talking about. So we're going to invite this ocean of love, this water, into your body, part by part, piece by piece, and allowing your body, your salt body, to dissolve into this ocean of love. And so you can start with your feet and just welcoming in the warm water to your feet and just allowing your feet to dissolve in the ocean. And continuing to allow the water to percolate up through your legs, your knees and hips, and just allowing it to dissolve in the ocean. And of course, we're not getting rid of sensations. This isn't anesthesia, right? So whatever pressure, temperature, texture, things are happening in your body, they're still happening. But again, the visual is different, the map, the story. You're no longer creating these boundaries of body. So we're just allowing it to be more expansive and more fluid. And it might feel quite different. So we can continue to allow the water to come in up through your torso and just dissolving everything into the ocean, your abdomen and your lower back and upper back and shoulders, letting the water flow down through your arms and hands and fingertips and just dissolving into the ocean. Coming all the way up to your neck. And this is a funny moment because we tend to locate our sense of self in the head. So right now there's this funny thing happening where there's this ocean, and then the only thing that's left is this head that's you, and it's bobbing around. And you can invite the water to come in and coming up through your jaw and your mouth and your nose and your eyes and your head, and just dissolving that into the ocean. And so now where are you? It's a funny question because there's now no separation between you and anything else. There's just this field of sensations without any borders or boundaries or edges or distinctions. All the same things are happening in your nervous system that you're familiar with, but maybe they just feel really different. They feel expansive. They feel like perhaps like currents or ripples or bubbles in this oceanic field of sensations. Good. And then this is the very last step because we're just relaxing, right? We're relaxing and letting go of these different structures and just coming into this experience of unity, or maybe something even simpler than that. And so we've been holding on to, of course, this story, this metaphor of the ocean. And we can let go of that too, right? You don't have to hold on to that. So just drop the whole ocean thing. Even drop the sense that there needs to be some space, that space needs to be boundless, and all these sort of things that we might be picturing, some void or something like that. Just let go of all that and just kind of get out of the way and just allow sensations to do whatever they're doing. And here we're letting go of there being any particular experience that we're trying to have. So it doesn't have to feel non-dual, or it doesn't have to feel unified. Whatever's happening, maybe some boundaries are coming back online. Maybe you're starting to feel parts of your body. That's fine. We push the pendulum all the way out to the unity, all ocean. And now we're just kind of letting the pendulum fall and see what happens. Just letting sensations do their thing. Recognizing that we're not even letting it happen or doing something to do that. It's just already happening on its own. Okay, good. So you can now slowly open your eyes And transitioning, noticing, yeah, we didn't go anywhere. Nothing has changed. All those same qualities are available, even with eyes open, just different sensations. What was that like for you?
That's the thing. Yeah. It's almost, it's the perfect extension of the floating in space.
Mm-hmm.
It really just goes right, and then it's just, yeah, it's very, very hard to talk about, but the way that you were guiding, the visualizations you were pointing at, is kind of how it feels. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And this is probably the most direct preparation I can offer people for a 5-MeO-DMT full release, because it's much faster, but it just, there's a brief period in there where there doesn't feel like there's any boundaries or separation. Everything just feels like some kind of field of energy, and it's much more intense. This is more slow and relaxing. It's more like, but yeah, this is really designed to acclimatize people to letting go of all these locations of me and not me, and the self located in the head and all that sort of stuff, so that when all that stuff goes bye-bye, like in the 5-MeO experience, you can just allow it to unfold, and there's less of that. I need to hold on, and it's okay if that happens, and it just makes things take a bit longer. So if we can kind of lubricate the process, it just lets you go deeper, faster.
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. So those are my 3 main meditations. The other odds and ends, and I'm also being aware of time, and I can't believe it's.
Oh, I know.
Holy.
We've done like an hour and a half.
Like I was going to look over and be like, oh, I thought it would be. Yeah, I guess we got started at 5. I have a few exercises left that are more. Yeah, it's more like. It's more like open eyes stuff and visual and playing around with thoughts and speech and stuff like that. The how can I say, richest ways that I found myself into non-duality, and it actually happened spontaneously with a mushroom journey, because all of a sudden I noticed my visual field just really changed, and the change was permanent. And this is really interesting that this can happen to people. It happened to my brother too, which is interesting to a certain extent. Is that everything just got much more vivid, much more sharp, and started to take on this dreamlike quality. It was a single mushroom dose, and ever since then, that's just how my visual field looks like all the time, which is, it's just wacky that can happen to somebody. But that gift from the mushroom, I think, inspired me to really build out the visual part of noticing non-dual phenomenology. And so, I'm happy to just offer,
let's do it. That's exciting.
What things look like to me. And again, it's not about you having my experience, but it's just like, hey, I'm seeing things this way. What about you? And maybe it'll open up something interesting
pointing
for
out.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. So usually the whole thing with seeing is that in a conventional dualistic way, there's that sense of obviously subject object, and I'm looking at a field of, not even a field, it's just like an array, let's say, of objects. It's like, you're an object, and that's an object, and the bottle is an object in the notebook or whatever. And I'm kind of making myself an object too as the perceiver. And so it's a very fragmented, kind of separated world. And so when we start to see in a more non-dual way, it's less about seeing stuff than it is about seeing. So it's sort of folding the process of visuality back on itself in the self-reflexive way, so that you're noticing something more like the nature of visual sensations and the nature of visual consciousness, which is just a really different way than just seeing objects. And so one of the easiest ways to start to do this is just by starting to expand from this kind of seeing to more of this kind of seeing. So it's much more peripheral. And that I find that's because there's something about when we focus on the center of our of our focal point, it's very much about perceiving that object sharply in this one. So we're kind of in this mode. And so there's a softening as we activate our peripheral vision. There's almost like a zoom out effect. And you can keep going kind of like farther and farther and farther. And eventually there's this thing that can happen where I don't know if it's actually this way, but at least it feels that you're kind of taking in the entire visual landscape almost in like one gulp. Like it's sort of like one panorama. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that, yeah. So this is a first shift from the world of subject object into this world of just this visual scene, this kind of panorama.
All at once.
Yeah, all at once. Yeah. Or at least it feels that way. You know,
Yeah.
maybe anyway. So that's really interesting. And that's a huge shift for a lot of people, just doing that and just training yourself to see that way most of the time is really interesting. And it's quite relaxing because it's less about, I need to do this, I need to do that. It's less instrumental. It's much more aesthetic and just experiential and just the display, right, arriving. And then we can look at the qualities of that display. So one of the things that I notice is that when I'm looking at what appear to be different objects, my mind can see and chop up all these things into their separateness, but there's also a palpable sense of it all being part of the same fabric. And so the best metaphor I give to people with this is if you look at a huge mirror, like at a restaurant or something like that, you can look at it and you can see all the shapes and colors and all the people and the food and everything. But you also just know intuitively it's just one thing. It's just obvious. And you perceive those things simultaneously and you don't even have to think about it. And at least my subjective perception of the visual field is it's almost identical to that feeling. Like there's this feeling that everything is differentiated in all its shapes and colors, and it's also very obviously just one screen, almost like a TV screen or something like that. Do you get any sense of what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So that's interesting. And another fascinating component of the visual field is that it doesn't have any edges that you can find.
Yeah.
So if you actually look for them,
weird.
It's really weird because I think intuitively we have a sense of like, oh, it kind of ends here,
right.
like we're punching a hole in the world or something like that with our visuality. But if you actually look for the edges, like you just can't find them. It's like there's sort of visual stuff, and then it's just like it's not like you see a line or a border or a boundary. It just, I don't even know what to call it. It's just edgeless, right?
Yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah.
Actually, because we assume, like you said, we construct this thing, but when you really look, like I'm looking now,
you just can't. Yeah.
It's actually, the whole thing turns into something that, it's indescribable.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And it makes sense. It's like consciousness only knows what it knows, and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So it can't perceive a boundary between those two things. You can only see what you can see. Like the display is only displaying what it displays. So there's it's like the picture doesn't have a frame. It can't. Yeah. It's just, and this is interesting. I find this also can induce certain energetic feelings for people because, when you notice that, there can be a feeling of boundlessness or edgelessness. Some people describe this in words like infinity and things more poetic like that. Oftentimes I find for people, there's a feeling almost of openness that's very similar to the feeling people seek out when they go into nature in the forest or at the top of a mountain. And I think that's because it engages your peripheral vision, because we're so used to being on our phones and our computers, and all of a sudden you get into nature.
Space.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is you can notice that quality of the visual field even here in this studio.
It's right in front of us. Yeah.
You can be, sending an email and whoa. And so that's really interesting that there's this kind of panoramic, spacious, boundless quality to the visual field that's just, in theory, always available. You may not be noticing it all the time, but it's like as soon as you can just catch yourself, it's like, oh, it's still here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find it's quite relaxing. And it shifts out of that instrumental problem-solving relationship with life to more of that almost just receptive aesthetic. It just feels like this beautiful art installation that's just happening spontaneously, this incredible display. So another funky thing about the visual field, and this is something that happened for me, and I think it was partly related to the mushrooms. Not everybody gets this, so if you don't see this, like whatever, it's not some kind of prerequisite. But there's this way that the visual field can collapse into seeming like quite literally two-dimensional. And it kind of makes sense because it's like, well, it's in the back of our retinas, it's like 2D. So the 3D thing must kind of be an illusion of the brain, like constructing that. But it seems like there's a way to collapse the illusion. And at least there's a lot of ways that you can do this. One of the ways that's usually the easiest is if you close one eye or you cover it, and then you kind of collapse your depth perception. And then you just have this curiosity of, can I look around at things? And sometimes you might look in funky ways just to shift your what's familiar and see things as if there's no dimensionality, as if I'm looking at like a TV screen. Instead of seeing an object with depth and weight, can I see it as if it's just this paper thin image, like made of light? And maybe that's happening in this way, maybe it's not. And we can try something else if it's not. But are you noticing anything like that? Okay, good. Yeah. So for people doing this at home who may be like, I'm not seeing this at all, which is fairly common because I think it's a little weird. There's other ways that you can do that. So another way is if you blink your eyes back and forth kind of fast, you'll see your whole visual field is going, and
it's flat.
Like there's this way that it just looks like a slide on a projector. This is going, no. And for people with glasses, actually, this is another cool way to do it, is you can take your glasses and just kind of go like this. And it's kind of trippy, and you see these subtle ways that it's not even really subtle, that the visual field is just going, ooh, and it just looks obviously like a flat image. And this is an interesting thing to notice because sometimes people ask me like, who cares? Or like, why, it seems like a parlor trick or something like that. Like, why would you do that? But what's interesting, I find, with non-duality is that when the visual field, which there's this illusion of depth that, at least for me, it preserves that sense of separation. So it's like, I'm way over here and like Zubin's over there and we're like these separate things. But if it collapses into a two-dimensional screen, it's like there's the sense of there being air kind of between us. Like that's just a story.
Yeah.
So the dimensionality of like the space between us just goes like this. And then you're just like, boom, like right here. So there's actually no separation between us because it's just flat, which is really interesting. And so it's actually, even though it sounds like, why would you make the world flat? That sounds like, disappointing or something. But it actually, it creates more intimacy because you can look up at the sky or look up at the moon or an airplane, and instead of look at it way up there, it's right here. Right. There's no separation from you or anything.
And interestingly, that then bleeds into the sound field too. It bleeds into.
Oh yeah, everything. All the senses are just like this. So we could do this in all the different
every gates.
Yeah, which is interesting. There's this. I know Chogyam Trungpa is like a really controversial character, but he had some really great quotes. I'm not gonna lie, and one of them is he says something. It's something along the lines of when you get enlightened or you wake up or something like that. That the sky becomes a big blue pancake and it falls on your head. Yeah. And I was thinking, is that just like a nonsense poem? What is? And then I realized, oh my God, he means that literally. It's
literally true.
It's literally true. It's just this flat thing that's your mind is just creating. Yeah. And so then that becomes an interesting doorway into this other realization that, if it's flat, that means a couple of things that we'll get into. One of which is there's nothing behind it. Because if there's anything behind it, you're just imagining that. And this is really an interesting thing. It took me a long time of just walking around my house and my office and just doing these exercises and looking at things in weird ways and noticing that your mind is constantly constructing what you think is behind what you're seeing. And this gets into kind of like that floating in space thing where we're letting go of the furniture, letting go of the architecture. So for example, like, there's a wall over there, right? So if we both look at that wall, I can tell my mind might want to come up with a story, right? Oh, there's that wall, and then behind that, there's
there's a kitchen,
the rest of the kitchen and the condo, all this sort of stuff, the living room, and let's say I just let go of that and just see this in this more minimalist kind of way as the display of what it is, as this two-dimensional image, and then it's not even really a wall; it's sort of this display, and there's different colors and there's different shapes and there's things that I'm storying as wall and etc. And that's all there is, right? Like it's like this. There's that old saying from Shinzen Young, like paper thin and feather light. It's like you really see that quite literally, that it's almost infinitesimally thin. It's like 2-dimensional, and it looks just like this display of lights. And then things that used to look heavy look almost immaterial. Like I can look at a dump truck and it just looks like this dream image that has no weight to it whatsoever. And there's nothing behind it. And so this is really interesting. So as you just look around, you know, what is on the display is all there is. And anything else you're adding to it is story. And that's okay. I mean, but it's just interesting to notice it doesn't have to be there. And that's kind of another thing to let go of. And it seems like all these things that we're constantly making, it's just these subtle stresses in the nervous system. And as you're letting go of all these background processes, it's just your mind is just allowing this raw display of just what's there without all the extra stuff. And it's just much more relaxing. And I find it really funny too to like look down at the floor because it's sort of like the floating in space thing. It's like,
oh yeah, that gets really
right. It's like
can be disorienting. Like,
okay, I'm seeing, you know, this flat image, and I'm seeing things that I would call, you know, feet and shoes and the image of the carpet, but like that's all there is. There's no floor. There's no foundation. So it's just, yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah, and this is also fascinating too, because it means that we never actually move anywhere. You know what I mean? It's like, because it's like if I go take a walk around the neighborhood and come back, of course the story is that there's this pre-existing 3D space and my 3D body is like moving along the map and navigating. And, you know, who knows, that maybe that's happening in some material plane that I don't make any claims about objective reality or whatever, but in my subjective experience, it's more like, there's kind of something that sort of feels like a space maybe. And it's like these different sensations are just kind of fluxing and arising within it. I mean, I'm still kind of constructing space and whatever, but it's just the sensations are fluxing and the visuality, the content of that is changing, but it's like the screen itself never moves. You know, it's just really interesting that you're always kind of home in a way, and everything's just kind of changing in that way. So that's just a really, really interesting investigation. And the other thing, so yeah, there's nothing behind anything. And of course, this is the headless way move, is there's nothing in front of it either, right? So if it's 2-dimensional, it's like there's nobody looking at it and there's nothing behind it. And have you done the whole headless thing? So I don't necessarily have to. People can look that up, and
it's a great set of pointing out instructions. You just point back. And I first discovered this years ago, and it was transformative because suddenly the subject disappears and there's only this. And it's a shift that can happen very quickly. And then the mind will arise and say, so what? But it is the seeing. It's like, oh, and it's everything that you're pointing at, just simplified in a very quick glimpse, but you can continue to kind of go deeper and deeper with it. This is a really interesting just set of exercises to do. And even just, you know, just turning your head, it's like we have these stories of, well, like that, you know, that microphone is a stable object and I'm turning my head separately, the separate object from it. But if we start to see in this non-dual way, it's more like, okay, I'm noticing that as I go like this, the image of the microphone is actually moving to the right as I'm moving my head to the left. And my head isn't actually moving. It's more like there are these sensations arising in the apparent kind of neck that are firing simultaneously as the visual field is moving and the content on it is shifting that way. But it's like, there's this illusion that, you know, it's like I have this kind of, there's this pre-existing 3D reality and I have this almost, this kind of lens that's moving through it. But at least as I investigated, that doesn't seem to be how it's actually happening. It's more just like, there's this boundless screen. It's not even really a screen because it's just what it is.
It's just what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's really interesting. And let's see, is there anything else? So we did the headless way. I think I'm forgetting something, but I think those are kind of the main things.
It's quite a bit, and it hits most of the sense gates. And so you find that this then helps. Doing this work in advance, and of course I've done a fair bit of this, but not enough, honestly. And when I say enough, meaning it's something I've actually it's a little bit of a hole in my practice because it's been more going into the body and sort of this trauma work and the emotion stuff. But coming back into the sense gates, it's like a place you never left. It's like coming home. It has that feeling to it.
I personally think this visual stuff can be very important for integration. Because a lot of times when we're doing meditation, we have eyes closed and we feel like we're going really deep, or maybe even going elsewhere or something like that, into some kind of inner space or landscape. And similarly with psychedelics, you can feel like you're journeying somewhere, right? But when you start to just in a very ordinary way and just interacting with people, going to the grocery store, writing an email, and all these qualities of the visual field are online. And it definitely takes some time. Like this whole process took me, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something like that. It was really, I mean, I don't think anyone would have noticed I was doing it, but for a while I was just going around just constantly doing these little experiments, just being like, I'm looking at this brick wall and there's nothing behind it. It's just an image and it's not even bricks. It's just like light, and I would do the headless way for a while, practicing like this. And then can I do it without my finger? And can I do it, like with my eyes in any kind of position? And then it just feels like it like learning to ride a bike, it becomes like muscle memory. And then there was this kind of shift for me where it just felt like the operating system for me visually, I don't ever claim that anything is 24/7 because that's just unrealistic, but it just feels like my main base of just perceiving the world visually is in this way with a lot of these things online. And it does feel like just a beautiful reminder of just the mystery of this consciousness experience. And I find it to be very heart-opening as well, because when I'm interacting with people, oh my God, there's just so much happening. Because before, when I think back to memories of before I started doing all this stuff, it's like I'd be looking at you and it's like, okay, Zubin's over there and I'm over here and we're totally separate. And maybe there's all this stuff happening in my mind of, I got to say the right things and I'm trying to control what I say to have a certain impression on you. And so there's all this kind of anxiety in the sense of this separation and this sense that we're really, I don't know, just locked in our own little kind of silos, I guess, in the conversation. And I used to have a lot of anxiety around like eye contact as well too. So there was this sort of shyness I used to have around maybe talking and looking at. I still do this a little bit. I
do it too.
I think it's an unlearning process, but as these things started to come online, it's like, I mean, I can do this right now as I like look at you and do some eye gazing here, and as these things really start to propagate and open up in a deep way, it's like, whoa, okay, there's this like boundless visual field. And, there's this kind of flat, mysterious screen arising. Oh, and here's where the suchness is arising that we talked about earlier, too, where everything has this sense of, wow, like the microphone is so microphony and your face is so like Zubin in this way that is like, it feels like I could be looking at your face in a museum or something like that. It's like it has this quality of something very radiant and very like self-presencing and like almost like holy. And I look at you and there's almost this sense of, this is almost a spiritual cliche of like, God and drag, that Ram Dass stuff. But it's like, I know what you're talking about. Like I look at you, and because I'm not seeing you and just putting a label on you, like, oh, Zubin and all that I know about you, I'm putting it in some kind of box. Like I'm seeing you, quote unquote, in real time, just as this arising of what's happening like right now. And so that means like every time I look away or look back, like I'm seeing like a fresh Zubin for the first time. And so there's something, and it's almost like you have a quality that looks spiritual, like you look like a divine being or something like that, because it looks like you're made of lights. And you're not, there's not any separation between us. And it's like, am I looking at you? Are you looking at me? Is there somebody here behind, like in my head, like the little homunculus, like looking out at you? Or is that sort of softening into just this openness where it feels like your face just kind of inhabits that totality? And so there's something about your face that now feels epic, like almost like the Grand Canyon or like a mountain or something like that. Cause it's all that there is right now in the visual field, or it's occupying most of it. And so it's amazing. Like I'm looking at you and like, what an amazing way to take in another human being's presence without all of the just conventions of how I'm just want to kind of take a mental shortcut of being like, oh yeah, Zubin, I know that guy. He has this, that, and that, the other qualities. And then that's an incredible gift for anybody. Like when I'm seeing my kid and I'm seeing my wife, oh, there's my wife doing that thing again. We always do this with our loved ones. We're kind of are putting them in this box, these cognitive shortcuts. But each moment, seeing that your mind is creating this person, your partner, any human being, like afresh, and wow, like what a radiant like presence they are. It's it's hard to describe. It's like it really opens the heart.
Which you just did, and you just answered the question when they say who cares and why care. That's it. And that's it. And I have a very similar experience. Not as like, it's much more ephemeral, but it comes in glimpses like that for me. It's not as stable, to use that word, but it's that dropping into suddenly the distance is gone and it's everything. And it's so intimate.
Oh, so intimate.
So intimate. Yeah.
Yes, it really is. Yeah.
There isn't and that's the non-dual experience.
Yeah. So
I think that's perfect. Like, that's the perfect wrap to the whole like arc.
Yeah. It's funny. I have this little laundry list of like other little tricks or whatever, but I'm like, whatever. This is enough. Like
it's a fair bit. I just want 2 hours in. Yeah.
I just want to share.
But I guess it's to say there are infinite ways to go about this.
Yeah.
And you've shown us ways that like I haven't explored in this way. Like it's incredibly helpful. Whether there's psychedelics or no psychedelics, this is the sort of practice of investigating the visual fields. And other people talk about this as well in different ways, and everybody has a different way. And so you look and you find the one that seems to resonate. Douglas Harding years ago resonated with me. And now sometimes Locke Kelly's approach, where he does the same thing with the peripheral field.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, expands it, and he says, seeing is receiving. Notice this. We want to feel like we're going out to grasp an object with our visual field. When we relax, it's the display. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm happy to share it. And I hope it's helpful to the viewers out there. And even if, and I want to say too, like, sometimes when I describe these things, people can have a sense of, well, I'm not getting it. Why am I not having the right experience? And I just want to emphasize again, like, who cares about my experience? This is just, I'm just sharing these things in case they might resonate, in case they might open up. Does it matter whether you see the visual field as 2D or 3D? No, of course not. But if there's anything in here that resonates or that sticks, or you just, it just makes you see things a little differently, it's a pointer. Yeah. And it's bringing you more into that just direct, intimate experience of this. And
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Mira, your website is unjourneying.com. We'll put it in the links. Yep. We'll link to our prior show. That was the context for this and the epic story. And
I'll have my YouTube channel is very sparse, but I'll be building it out. So it's also going to be Unjourneying.
And we'll link to it.
Yeah.
Unjourneying. So, perfect. Thank you, Mira.
Yeah. Thank you, Zubin.
And thank you for doing these exercises. We think we're doing them, in a sense, there's sometimes can be a feeling of selfishness exploring this, but it's really known deeply to be the opposite. It's like by doing this work, we bring intimacy to everyone around us. Yeah. We bring love and the ocean of love.
Yeah.
It is the best thing you can do for others is doing this work for yourself.
Absolutely. And it's funny how my wife actually notices, because when I started doing these practices, we'd be just talking and suddenly she'd go, what is that you're looking at? I didn't even know consciously if my face was changing, but there was something
There's a feeling
subtly by
seen.
Looking at her in this way where she started to look just like this radiant goddess because she was made of light.
Yes.
And she could feel that. And it brought us so much closer together.
Absolutely. And I could feel it when you were doing it with me, and I could feel it for you too. And humans are wired for that. So, thank you, Mira.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are out. Peace.